le flux. So is it working? Welcome everybody. Here we go. Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending where you live. Welcome for that new Golem online session. So I'm going to be your host. My name is Nico. I'm product manager at Golem, and at the same time, Alex is also connected. He's going to be the one who's going to watch your comment in the chat box. So just a brief about what we're going to do today. Today's session is called Quickstart. It's mostly focused for people who never used the software before and want to make their first crowd in a couple of minutes. But it's also targeted for people who already know the software and want to see how we use it and how we consider the workflow to look like. So I'm going to be with you for the next, I'm going to say 30 minutes. And we'll see how fast we can go within 30 minutes. And at the end, probably take some Q&A. If you got questions during the chat, during the session, just put them in the chat, and I'll try to answer at the end. There's going to be more sessions in the following weeks, probably the same day on Thursdays and Fridays at the same time. Next week sessions are going to be about character conversion on Thursday, and on Friday we're going to speak about the new layout tool. Let's get started with the quick start then. So I'm running Golem 7.3.1, but probably what I'm going to show today works for any Golem 7 version you probably have. I'm going to skip the install process here. I'm just going to assume that you downloaded the software on the download.golem.com and you install it, and as soon as you load the plugin, you probably end up with that shelf here, which says that the plugin is being loaded. Whenever I'm reaching a new computer with a new install of Golem, the first thing I try to do is to click on that first button here into the shelf, which is called Check Scene Settings. And the idea, it's when I click on it, the idea is like it analyzes your Maya settings and try to figure if it's ready for playing with Golem. So here, that was on intent, but I set up one of the parameters in the wrong way, so I get the idea that something is wrong. And this one is actually pretty important. It says that the playback speed is not set to play every frame. And one really important thing about Golem is that it's a simulation engine, which means that for every frame, if you want to see the result of frame 10, you need to compute frame 9. And to have 9, you need to have 8, etc., etc. So you need to process every frame. And by default, Maya tends to skip frame as soon as viewport gets too much busy and it can't reach real time. So it prefers to skip frame to reach real time rather than playing every frame. So whenever you do simulation, it can be Golem or it can be close or whatever, you really want to make sure that that play every frame setting is set up properly. If you don't know how to set one of those here, you usually have a help link here, and as soon as you open that help link, it's throw you to the documentation and especially to that page called Setup as First Launch. And for every single option we're having to check, it tells how to set it up for you. So let's roger that, and let's bring back this to play every frame. I don't really care if it's free or max real time. I'm going to stay with max real time. And now I'm all good. And as soon as you got that yes button here everywhere, well, you're good to go, and you can process. So what we're going to do today is following that kind of workflow. So I'm going to jump into Maya really quickly, but I just want to show you how we consider the Golem workflow right now. So as you can see, that workflow is divided in two parts. There's one which is called the assets conversion part, which is at the top here. This is where you convert, characters, motions, and you import your geometry. So we are not going to speak about that part today. We're going to totally skip that part here, and that's going to be the focus of next week's sections. And we totally going to go addressing that part here, which is production part. So whenever you need to have make a scene, like a Golem scene or simulation scene, you need to go through those steps there. So there's kind of many of them. There's like 6, but sometimes one step is just clicking on one button. So some will be like really fast and quick. So making a scene means placing your characters first, so defining what type of characters you need and placing them, assigning some behaviors. So this is just a step, but this is probably where we're going to spend most of our time today. Exporting the simulation, because here what you ended up with are just simulation results. You don't have real geometry with Maya. I'll talk about that a bit later. And if you want to render that, you want to be able to export. And once it's exported, you are able to render. And if in the meantime, between exporting and rendering, you need to fix some stuff, you can use the layout tool to do so. Okay, so let's go through those steps here. So first is defining the types of characters I want to have in my scene and place them. So let's get started. So I've got an empty Maya empty scene here, Golem freshly loaded. And if I want to create an entity type, I just have to click on that button here with the 2 characters standing, one white and one orange. And if you look at the bottom of Maya, the tooltip tells entity type nodes. And when I click on this, so that means that I'm going to import a type of character. So let's say you do maybe a battle simulation. You may want to have a different type of character. One type of character may be horses, one will be soldiers. So those are going to be different characters you want to have into your scene, and you need to load them into your scenes. So here what I'm going to do is using some assets we provide for free within the Golem character pack. So when you download the software, we encourage you to also download assets that we provide called the character pack. And it comes with a bunch of assets, so you know, like a car, a man character and a woman character, some soldiers, some horses, cartoon character. And here I'm going to stick with the default casual man character. So what I want to have is a crowd of man characters. So I'm just going to load that Golem character file, which has previously been converted for you. And once again, we're going to speak about how you make those files next week with your own characters. So bring it in. It's going to ask me where are the shaders. That Golem character file just stores the skeleton and the geometry information, but we can't really store shading information, mostly because you guys may use, you know, RenderMan, Redshift, V-Ray, Arnold, or whatever rendering engine, and we don't have a file format which is able to store all those shading nodes which are proper to each rendering engine. So what we ask people to do is to load a Maya file, usually your lookdev file, which contains the character and the shaders on it. So that's just a way to have shaders within the scene. So here, also within the character pack, we provide those shaders for the rendering engine we support. So as I loaded the Casual Man Light character, I want to load the shaders for the Casual Man Light, and then after that I can pick which rendering engine I want to use. So here I'm going to use Arnold, so I'm going to use the Casual Man Light _ AR, which stands for Arnold, and load that in. So that's going to load my T-pose character, so we can even see how my characters look like. It has a skeleton, but once again, we don't really care here because we just want to have the shaders. So at the end, it could even be like a cube with shaders assigned on it. That will be the same. What we just want to have is the shaders within the scene. Make sure not to hide that character. I can put it maybe below the ground if I don't want to see him, but make sure not to hide it, because if you hide it, Arnold will not translate those shaders, and you won't be able to see them at render time. Okay, so let's move on. I created my entity type, so that was pretty quick and easy. At the end, I just end up with a new node in the scene within that group called GLM entity type. And if I take a look within that node here, within the attribute, I can see my file, which has been loaded. I can see there it's going to be, it's going to have some scale variation. So we're going to multiply the scale uniformly by a random value between 0.9 and 1.1. It's probably going to be greenish within the viewport, and the rendering type, we'll speak about that next week, is just the casual character, so I won't have any flag into that scene. I probably need to maybe make a terrain really quickly here. So I'm gonna just grab a plane here, a big plane, and make it as a terrain. So just selecting the geometry, selecting that button here to create a terrain from the geo. And once again, that creates a new node called terrain node. And within the ground, it tells that we are going to use Maya geometry as a ground, and that Maya geometry is going to be that p-plane one I just created. Okay, so far so good. So now I have my type of character. I want to populate my scene. So if you were here yesterday, you may have seen me using the population tool. So that's that guy here. By the way, usually I'm going to use probably the shelf from the left to right order. So the shelf is kind of sort. Each different buttons are grouped together based on the process you're going to do. So this is like character conversion, setting of your scene, behaviors, export, layout, shading, and render, and layout and shading and rendering here. So it goes through the same steps we've seen within the workflow. So here I'm going to stay around here. I want to populate my scene. So I want to use the populate tool. So it's a tool. If you double click on it, it brings you the panel. And within that population tool, you can decide what kind of shape you want to use to bring your character. So let's play with the box, for example. So I'll just be able to drag and drop a box here, which will define the zone in which the character will be created and started. If I'm not happy with the design of that box once it's been created, I can still go into the node here and expand that group, and it brings me the manipulator to just change the size of that box. There's just a few positions there, so let's edit that. Let's go back into the pop tool and let's take a look at the attribute editor once again. So here I can decide how many positions I want to set into my crowd zones. So I can create as many zones as I want to. I'm just going to stick with that one for now. If I just fill it out, I'll have just a regular grid here. So I can, to make it more organic, I can maybe change the distance. I can noise those a bit. I can also maybe noise orientation. If I want, I can paint some densities on top of that, etc., etc. Here my ground is flat, but if my ground has some relief, some bumps, you will also see the positions of the slots being adapted here. So when I'm happy with this, so I can move the tool as well. When I'm happy with that, I can just press create. And what it's going to do is it will create like a particle system. And for every single position here, you will have one particle. And that particle system will be connected to something called the crowd field, which means that at any time you rewind the simulation to the start frame and run a couple of frames, you are end up with your characters here. So that's my, that's my first crowd here. All the characters are following the positions and the orientations that I just set up. And you got all your characters with some scaling variation here. So here I just placed my character. If I run the simulations, nothing's happening. I haven't defined any behavior yet. So just to quickly go back into the population tool, just a side note here, if I move the pop tool and I rewind and play a couple of frames, my characters stay at previous positions. Because that tool here, it's not like interactive. If you move it, you don't have the crowd reacting to it. It's kind of a, let's say, an offline tool, and it's really up to you to decide when you need to update your crowd. So let's say I would like my crowds to start from here. I would like maybe to add some distance between those guys. If I want to replace that previous crowd I just created, I just want to make sure that here the right particle system is created, but it just registered the last one you used. The last crowd field which has been used is registered, and if you place replace, now if you rewind the simulation and replay again, now you get your characters being replaced properly. So just a side note with the pop tool, keep in mind that yeah, it's not interactive, and you need to update it if you need it. Okay, so we place characters. Now we want to assign some behaviors. So as I said, this is probably where we're going to spend most of our time today within the behavior editor. So the way I usually try to explain that tool, the way you read this is you got on the right side a kind of outliner of your scene. So it's kind of a dedicated outliner. One shows the different entity types you have in your scene. So right now we're just having one, which is the man character. Probably should have renamed that. You can see also the behavior which has been assigned, so it's pretty empty. The clips, motion clips, which has been assigned, empty as well, and the triggers empty as well. So that's your outliners here. On the left panel here, you've got the behaviors. So it's kind of building blocks you can assign to your characters. So there's a building blocks to go somewhere, to avoid characters, to play an animation, to do some IK, to do some physics, to do some, maybe if you want to do flocking kind of behaviors for animals, we got that kind of behaviors. If you want to make traffic for cars, we got all those behaviors as well. So those are blocks you can assign to your characters. Next, you got operators, so you can combine those blocks with some operators and make some, conditions, like a if condition. If something is happening in my scene, I want my characters to do something, or you want to loop some behavior, you want to run a behavior multiple times, let's say. And below are going to be triggers. I'm not sure if we're going to have time to talk about those, but triggers are defined when does a behavior should start and when should it stop based on conditions. So let's say you are within a zone and you want your characters to react as soon as they are in the zone. You can use those to start a behavior. So when you open the behavior editor for the first time in a scene, it tells you to open a crowd entity type from the outliner to get the party started. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to double click on that guy here, and that's going to open my behavior flow. So my flow here is empty. So this is the start of my simulation, and you will try to reach the end as soon as you can. So as there's nothing right now, it just ends right away. So that's my duty here to add some behaviors, to throw some behaviors here. So we're going to do like maybe a really casual use case where we want to have people hanging around and avoiding each other. So I'm going to bring a go-to behavior. And so I just drag and dropped it from the outliner. You may see it's kind of transparent right now, which means it's not active. And as soon as I go close to an arrow here, you can see the arrow highlights himself, which means that if I drop it here, it will be connected to the flow now. If you want to unconnect it to the flow, you just press Alt and take your behavior, and you got that razor icon appearing instead of your mouse pointer. If I just release Alt and put it onto a flow again, now it's reconnected to my flow. So this is a behavior. It has some attributes, which can be seen within the attribute editor as well. So that's the default configuration of going somewhere. So here, I'm just saying I want my characters to go. Where do I want to go? So I want them to reach. I can either reach or flee. And what I want to reach is a random target within the environment. So here the environment is kind of infinite plane because I haven't defined any obstacles. So they just go randomly somewhere. I'm kind of happy with that. Probably we're going to speak about the different options into another video here, another session. I also want my characters to avoid each other or to avoid obstacles. Here I don't have any obstacles, but if I had some, I also wanted my characters to avoid them. And what I actually want is those two behaviors to play at the same time. So I want my characters to go somewhere, but also at the same time I want them to avoid the other characters. And to do so, what I want to use is the parallel operator. And as soon as I put two behaviors into that parallel operator, it means that those two will run at the same time. So if I want to create that parallel operator automatically, I just drag and drop two nodes on the same spot, and that creates that parallel for me. Okay, so let's rewind the simulation once again and play and see what's going on. Maybe let's add more frames here. So, yay, I've got characters moving around. And if we take maybe a top view on it, we can see that they're also avoiding each other. So they're going like kind of, randomly here within the environment. They're just scattering within infinite positions there. Maybe I want to make them gather all at the same position. So let me change quickly an option here so they're not going like all the way around. I can create maybe a target. bring that target somewhere, place some positions within the target. So you may recognize here the pop tool. So it's a pop tool here actually. So let's do something like this. And let's change my behavior to say that instead of going randomly, I want to use a population tool. And the population tool I want to use is the target shape one, which is the node I just created here, that blue crossed node. And next time I'm going to rewind this and throw it again. Now I'll get my characters all gathering to the different positions here of the target and avoiding each other. You may notice that they are not animated because I haven't defined how those guys should be animated. So, okay, let's fix this. Let's add a new behavior. I'm going to go really fast on that, but probably we're going to speak more about some like really classic behavior in the next session. But I'm going to use a behavior called locomotion. So that's the one with a walking character with an arrow. And that locomotion behavior just endorses plenty of animation, like locomotion animation, and assign them to your characters and just blend them based on what's required. So let's just double click on the locomotion behavior and once again within the character pack, within Golaem motions, we got a locomotion directory of a couple of animations here. So let's take a look. We've got a walk slow animation, walk normal, walk fast, a stand, a run, walk and turn, different degrees only on the left side. So I'm gonna take them all and bring them within the locomotion behavior. And just my walking animation here, they just left turns. So I want actually to say to the software that those are left turns, but I allow you to mirror them to create right turn versions of the animation. So for every single orient and rotate animation, I'm just gonna double click on the moon here. So when it's in this position here, so just the left side of the moon being orange, it means it plays the original motion. If you click once, it inverts the icon, so that means it plays just the mirror version of that animation. And if I click again, now you got the two sides filled with orange, so that means it's going to load the original animation and the mirrored animation. So I'll do the same for the other animation here. And now I should get my characters playing a nice and unique animation based on the steering order they've been providing. You can see some guys is running to catch up with his position here. So they're allowed to turn, they're allowed to walk, they're allowed to stand and stop. So yeah, in just a couple of minutes, you're able to create like a nice crowd which looks pretty realistic. If I click on a character, really important, I can see its visual feedback. So I can see how it looks in terms of footprints, how it does to the ground, how does the skeleton is animated. I can see the different behaviors which are running right now. So I'm having the go-to behavior, the navigation, and the locomotion. And if I got the locomotion, I got something a bit more like detailed about which animation gets blended at every time. So once again, we'll probably have a full session dedicated to behaviors later. You can just get the spirit here that at every frame or so, you get characters based on the characters and the order has been assigned, is get a unique assignment. So that's the motion displaying right now. If we pick that guy here, it's playing another set of animation. If we click on that guy here, it's playing another set as well. So that's the locomotion behavior, but we won't go into too much details here. Just keep in mind that you just have to provide locomotion animation here, which are looping, and the animation engine will deal for you to blend those animations together to generate the most appropriate posture for your characters. Okay, so let's say we're like really happy with that first batch of simulation, and we would like to render that and maybe get that approved to dailies, or at least propose a first version of it. So to bring those characters here to rendering, as I said before, because what you're seeing here, it's not Maya geometry. We don't have hundreds of characters for real within the viewport and the outliner as Maya geometry, else we won't be able to be like real time like this. So what we're having is some kind of display, proxy display of the character. So there, as it's not real geometry, we need to find a way to bring and to produce real geometry for the rendering engine. So what I want to do here is to export that simulation, so bake the simulation as a simulation cache. So I'm opening the simulation explorer here. It's asking me which field, so which crowd I want to export. I'm just having one here. What's the name of the cache? So it's the name of the scene, so I'm happy with that. And what's the start frame, end frame? I'm not going to export the 1,500 frames here. And where do I want to export it? So that's just within my project, so which is good. So just pressing export here will run the simulation for me in the background, and will bake the simulation results into simulation cache files. When I'm using the word bake, it's not, well, we're baking postures. So we're not baking out geometry, else that will generate, thousands of megabytes of data per frame. And I'm just having 100 characters here, but if you're doing 100,000, that's going to be way too heavy to handle. So we're just exporting orientation and positions and scales of every bone for every character for every frame. At the end of the process, it's asking me if I want to export the terrain, because I can use the terrain into layouts as well. So I'm going to say yes. And what you may notice is that now Golem, the UI has changed slightly. You got that green zone within your timeline here, which says that those frames have been cached. And you may have not noticed that icon yet, but that icon changed. You can see now a walking character with a cache icon next to it. So now it's saying that you are in cache mode. So let's change the timeline here. So cache mode, that means now I don't have to compute every frame before to see the frame after. I can just move freely in time and see how does my simulation looks like. But in the meantime, it means that if I change anything here, I won't see the result of it. So what I'm seeing here is what has been exported. If you want to go back into simulation, you just click on that button here. That just changes the mode you're in. And now you can rewind the sim and replay the sim. If you don't want to be into simulation anymore, either you export or you just click on that button again. That brings you back into cache replay. So as I'm in cache replay now, it means that I can render. So let's create a light within Arnold, and maybe before rendering, because rendering a crowd can be heavy, I'd want to check my rendering settings. So it's also a checker like the one we used at the beginning, but that one checks if everything is fine for rendering. So it checks all the attributes here. Is the version of Arnold is the right one? Have you done all the things you need to do about exporting your scene? And once again, if you had a no somewhere, it will send you to the documentation to see how you can fix that. But I can roger that, and now I can render. So just a side note about the rendering process here, what's going to happen is for every time we're having a character within the scene, we're going to generate a bounding box first. And as soon as a ray hit the bounding box, for every character, we're going to have a bounding box. And as soon as a ray hit the bounding box, we're going to generate the geometry when we need it. So it's called procedural rendering. And that's exactly what you're having here. So 9 seconds to generate 100 characters from the cache we're having. So you may notice here that I'm having a slightly different. My characters, they have like blue t-shirts, but within the rendering, they're actually colored in multiple ways. The reason is that when we define the characters, we define some shading variation. But for some hardware reason, we can't really show that geometry, that shading variation, within the viewport. So if you define some shading variation, you only see one texture within the viewport, but when you're going to render, you're going to see the full variation on the shading. On the contrary, you can actually see geometry variation within the viewport. So you can see your character here has some sweatshirts here, some t-shirts there. And if I decide to change that variation, so if I just go into my character and say, I don't want to have sweatshirt. So here I'm just saying I'm having either t-shirt, either sweatshirt. This is going to be 18% of my character, which will have a sweatshirt, 82, which will have a t-shirt. If I just put that to 0, and save. And if I render my scene now, as we don't bake out geometry, it's going to regenerate my characters without the sweatshirts. So now I should have only characters with t-shirts, and I didn't have to re-export my simulation again. So as you can see here, all my characters now have t-shirts because we didn't bake out geometry. And if I just want to refresh what's going on here, I can just refresh the cache, and now my geometry assignment is proper. So just to end up, I'm going to take 5 more minutes to show you the layout tool. So we spoke about that a bit earlier. We were saying that there was a step between export and rendering that you could take advantage of, which is called the layout. So let's say I go to the dailies with that scene, and I've got some notes about I want to have more characters maybe in the background here. Maybe I want that character here to have a sweatshirt. And I don't know, I want to get rid of those characters. Well, if you only have the simulation engine, you have to go back into your simulation workflow and deal with those modifications into your behaviors and relaunch the simulation again and again and again and again, which is really time consuming. So we decided to provide the tool which people could take advantage of, which could be used right after cache has been exported. So let's say you want to have more characters into the background. Maybe what I can do is select a bunch of characters. Let's say, oops, maybe let's remove that terrain for now so it doesn't take my selection into account. So here I can go into vertex mode here, and I can select those characters. And as soon as I selected those characters, I can go into my layout tool, which is that tool here, and I can create a selector node. So that selector node just taking my current selection and fills that into a selector node. So it means that now those characters have been selected, and I can apply a duplicate node onto those. And this way I just duplicated that exact same patch of characters, and I can move it and put it where I want to. So I just apply translate information on it. So you can either do your duplicate with Control-D within the viewport. It will create a duplicate node for you, or you can just drag and drop a duplicate node. For the translate is the same. You can either bring a translate node, which is here, or translate within the viewport. So now I'm having twice more characters in the background, which is exactly what I wanted. Maybe the thing is they're adding exactly the same posture, and probably some people will notice that. So maybe we can apply some time offsets, frame offsets. So to my same duplicated characters, I want to apply a frame offset within the cache. I just want to offset them by 5 frames. So you will notice that as soon as I press enter, now the posture of my characters changed slightly. So they've been shifted in time by 5 frames. So they're just playing the same frames, but 5 frames ahead. I can even noise that if I want to, maybe add a 5-frame noise, so they're not exactly the same. Okay, I was referring that maybe I wanted to kill some characters. So let's say I'm not happy with those guys. I want to remove them. I can bring another selector node here and connect it at the end. And you can see every time I'm connecting a new node, that new node becomes blue. And it means that this is my node which gets active. I can actually change which nodes get active by pressing the key V on my keyboard while being on a node. So let's say I don't want to duplicate my character anymore. I want to go back into that state. If I press V, now what I'm evaluating is just this. So I'm not duplicating, translating, and time offsetting my characters anymore. And if I go back into here, you can see now it's updating your viewport. So that means what you're doing here is it's kind of layers within Photoshop. It's a non-destructive way of applying modification on top of your cache. So, okay, let's say I want to get rid of those characters here. I can use the kill node and connect that to my selection. So I'm using middle mouse here to connect nodes together. And as soon as I got my selection and apply a kill, you can see those characters are here, not here anymore. And I wanted to update that character here and change his assets. So I can just bring one selector, selecting just that character alone, and maybe add remove mesh assets onto that character. So what I want to do is adding a mesh. So the mesh I want to add is probably the sweatshirt. And so you can see now the characters as sweatshirt and the t-shirt. So I want to remove that t-shirt here. So I just want to go there and t-shirt here and remove it. So I just added a mesh and removed another mesh here. And it, once again, it's non-destructive, so I can go back in time, go back in my layout to see what it was before, what it is now. And if I saved this, it's going to ask me to save that into a separate file. So I'm going to call that the layout file. And it will be taken into account into my rendering. So that means that as soon as it's saved, I can just render again. And all the modification I've just done, they're going to be added on top of my cache. So let's process with the rendering to see if we got more people in the background, if we got our killed character on the side, and if we got that sweatshirt guy. So okay, oh good. So we got the characters in the background, killed character here, and character with a sweatshirt. So just keep in mind that the layout is heading on top of the cache, which means that if I go back into simulation here, I'm just having my initial, oops, I've hidden my particles, so let's unhide them. If I just throw back my simulation again, I'm just having my initial number of characters. Those guys are not killed, and that guy doesn't have a sweatshirt yet. So that's just layers you're adding on top. So if you change your overall behaviors and you got your characters splitting between two targets, when you go back into layout, you'll get the same modification being applied, but on top of that new cache. So I think it covers the all steps. So that's really like a quick start, like going through the first step in a really quick way. We didn't really detail the tools, how we made the characters, but so making the characters will be the topic of next week's sessions on Thursday. And if you want to know more about the layout tool, here I just spoke about just a few layers, but we got plenty more here, and we can make some really powerful stuff even when the cache has been exported. So that's going to be the topic of Friday's session. So keep tuned. So that's it for me. If you guys have any questions, maybe we can take some time to address those. Okay, I can see the chat box. So any questions, go ahead. And let's do the same thing than yesterday and just say where you're from which country you guys are watching the live. So I'm doing the live from France. Or if you want me to show something maybe I've went really fast into, so I didn't really speak about triggers now. I didn't really spoke about physics behaviors. I could have made some ragdolls and exploding characters. And also, if you got ideas about stuff you would like us to show, well, feel free to push those in the chat box. We'll take a look at it and see we can make that fit with the planning. So we're gonna host the sessions for the next week. So go ahead. So plenty of people from Canada, Uzbekistan, really? Oh, welcome. Russia, Colombia. Apparently I was really clear, so nobody asked questions. Or maybe Alex answered most of them already. For people who haven't downloaded the software, feel free to grab it for free on the website. So if you go on download.golaem.com, you can just download the software with a PLE license. So that means you can just install it right away and you can play with every single feature for the unlimited time. The only limitation is that every time you're going to render, you'll have some orange meshes randomly scattered amongst your crowd. But apart from that, you're good. So there's a question. Can you take a minute to talk about the entity inspector feature on the layout tool? Haha. Yes, I can. I totally skip that feature for now. It's true. So if you take a look at the shelf, let's address that in a couple of minutes. If you take a look in the shelf, we got two icons which looks pretty similar. We got one icon with I don't know the English word for that magnifying glass, I suppose, with a working character. One is orange, and one is blue. So they are the same, but they are at different positions within the shelf. So if you remember what I said at the beginning, within the shelf, the order it's in define when you use it. So that one is the simulation entity inspector. So let's go back into simulation. If I pick a guy, oops, I need to go back into my mode here. That's opening the inspector, the visual feedback for the simulation. So I can see what's going on in terms of simulation, and that's exactly what this button is doing. When I'm in layout, that button here doesn't have any feature anymore. It doesn't. It's completely useless. But now you can use the entity inspector for cache replay. So if I go F9 to go into component mode, I can select a character or multiple characters, and I can inspect the character in terms of cache replay. So I can actually see what's the geometry is wearing. So right now he's wearing, let's say he's wearing the sweatshirt, probably. Yeah, it's wearing the sweatshirt because I removed the t-shirt from that guy. And if I go back into my layout here, so if I just remove my add remove mesh operation and I take a look at the list, now I can see that the character is wearing the t-shirt. So you can check what's the status of your character in terms of meshes, shading group assign, and shader attributes. So we use the shader attributes to deal with shading variation. So this is how we are able to make variation on the text, on the t-shirt, on the U, on the texture ID. We can speak about that, the shading variation in a separate session maybe. So that's what the entity inspector is for. So if you just have one entity, you just have one panel here. If you select multiple entities, you can just move around which entities you have. And if you select multiple entities, you can see some lines colored in blue. And the blue means that all the characters within your selection are wearing the same asset. So they're common to every single characters which has been selected. So why did we do that? Mostly because here my character is pretty simple, but sometimes you can end up with characters with hundreds of meshes. And it's not really easy to figure what they're wearing and what they have and what they don't. So you can use the entity inspector to do so. So I hope that answered the questions. Let's go back into the flow a bit. So what if I have to create multiple render layers, like for example, diffuse and contours? That's a good question. So I guess I'm not really like a specialist in rendering, so correct me if I'm wrong. So I guess that if you're doing one for diffuse and one for contour, you probably want to assign different shaders to your characters. So there's going to be like a render layer with one shading assignment and another render layer with another shading assignment. So shading assignment is, so if we assume this is the way it works, shading assignment is made within the character maker. So it's a file that you set up here. And so that's my file here. So every mesh gets assigned with a shader. So kind of the assignment between the mesh and the shader is kind of fixed by the character. So what you would have to do is to make two character files, one for your diffuse and one for your contour. And as those are going to be two different files, it means that depending on the render layer, you want to specify one or the other. And the node which is actually driving the rendering is here. So that's the render proxy. It's hidden behind the simulation cache proxy there. And it's actually registering also the character file you want to use. So here it's a Maya attribute. So you can break the connection here and probably set a value for one render layer and change your render layer and set another value. So you can make a casual manlight diffuse Golaem character, which will assign your characters with one shader. And you can make another one with contour and assign that the way you want to. Hopefully that answered the questions. If that don't, please send us an email to support@golaem.com and we'll be happy to take a look at it and maybe add more information here. I saw a question about does it work only with bipeds? Take a look at our demo reel. We get crazy studios all around the world who are able to use Golem with cars, creatures with 8 legs. If you've been watching Netflix Love, Death, and Robots, there's one really nice short film which is called Suits, about farmers who are fighting against aliens. So that's been made by the awesome people at Blur Studio in LA. And those alien creatures, they're 6-legged creatures going down the hill with physics and ragdolls all the way around. So no, that works with plenty of different characters. Is it possible to apply the modify settings from layout tool? That's a good question. So let me read that completely. Is that possible to apply the modify settings from layout to simulation? So that's what I was explaining earlier. You got your simulation here, which is the state of what you had with the rules, and you got your layout, and every single layout operation you're doing doesn't really, reflect into simulation. And you can't really reflect them into simulation because it means that those characters which has been killed, those characters which has been added, how do you reflect them in terms of behavior? We would have to add more behaviors here, and that's not an easy trick to do. So unfortunately, the answer here is no. The layout is really like a post-process to help you deal with the simulation there. Hope that answers the questions. Does Golem depends on third-party update software? Oh, see, Alex has already answered that one. Not sure to understand either. So yeah, Golem works. Maybe that's the questions. Golem works within Maya here. I probably should have said that. I consider that was obvious because I've been using Maya for years. But right now I'm actually using Maya here, and Golem is a plugin for Maya. So all the simulation part has to happen within Maya. And we also have integrations within Unreal, within Houdini, within Katana, but only for the layout part. So every time I open that layout tool and make some modifications, that's something you can use within other DCCs. Oh, and about the updates for each software. So the idea here is we're supporting from Maya 2017 to 2020, and we try every time there's a new version of Maya, we try to be able to support it pretty fast. And we also support multiple rendering engines. And if you take a look at our change logs and release notes, you'll be able to see which rendering engine and which rendering engine versions get supported. We usually support like 2 versions of each rendering engine. And depending on what our users are using, we try to update. Okay, another question here. How could I make each entity to go to the certain another place of the scene? Using locators, lead them to one point. Should I duplicate the particle shape or something like that? Yeah, there's actually plenty of ways to do that. So here, my population tool define multiple positions, but if you really want to scatter those guys around, well, you could just grab that target here and just probably change the distance and noise that a bit more probably. And now you can see your position are really scattering all around. The population tool can be controlled with maps and density, so you can paint positions where you'd like. And that's just one way to control the position of the characters. So here, if I just throw the sim, now you get the characters scattering. So they're just like picking one of those positions, and that's just scattering all the way. Yeah, the go-to behavior has plenty of options. Here I'm using the locator. I can actually do what you suggested, which is creating another particle system and ask them to reach there. I can use expression or PP attributes, sorry, so per particle attribute. So you can write your own expressions to create PP attributes, or you can make expressions with we got a small language to define expressions, or you can use a mesh. So you can create a mesh, and you can say you want the characters to reach your vertices or faces off or edges. Okay, so I propose to sum it up here. So that was like 35 minutes of session and 15 of questions. If you got more questions, feel free to put them into the comment section of the video. Apparently the chat box disappeared once we closed the streaming session. So if you don't want your message to get lost, put it into the comments. If you got more advanced questions, feel free to get in touch with the support. So you just have to go to support.golem.com, and hopefully that answers all questions. And see you next week for the next sessions. On Thursday and Friday, we're going to talk about making your own character. We're probably going to have like a VFX character. I'll take a character from Mixamo and an animation character. So some people were asking yesterday to use one of those casual rig you can find on the internet. So I'm going to try to take one of those and show you how to convert those. And on Friday, we're going to speak much more in details about the new layout tool, which is what we've been pushing into the Golem 7 version. This is one of the most advanced layout tool we have. So maybe I can address the two last questions we have. Is it possible to export Alembic or USD with textures? So that's a good question. So Alembic, we just have reference to the materials within it, but obviously you can bake your data to Alembic. And USD for sure, you can export USD. We use procedural USD, so that means we don't bake out geometry. Take a look at usd.golem.com, and we also have people from RadioFX who made a tutorial which shows you how the USD integration works. And Phoenix is asking if there are two placement tools, are they interacting with each other, like avoiding overlapping? Yes, they do. By default, each population tool has something called collisions attributes, and you're just specifying with which other population tool they do interact. And if you disable that, slots will be overlapping each other, and if you enable it, they won't. So yeah, that's it. Happy weekend for everybody. Happy Easter as well. Stay safe and stay home, and see you next Thursday. Take care.